I want to welcome a special guest to today's episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery, Julia Brunson. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to talk a lot about the Gift Responsibly campaign in relation to gambling, which this podcast is known for talking about gambling, among other things. But before we do, can you just give the listeners a little bit of a background about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Julia Brunson. I work for the National Council on Problem Gambling as a communications manager. I started with NCPG in May of 2022. So I've been helping to oversee the Gift Responsibly campaign for 3 years now.
That's great. Thanks for sharing about all about that. And this is really timely because we're now entering in, I was just in an airport where we went from October Halloween to Christmas is already set in place, and the Gift Responsibly campaign is really a important, timely issue coming up with holidays and gift giving and all that. So, can you be the one to tell this audience who probably does not have a lot of knowledge or awareness about this campaign what this is?
Absolutely. So the Gift Responsibly campaign was founded in the early 2000s by the International Center for Youth Gambling Problems and High Risk Behaviors at McGill University. And the campaign educates communities about the risks of buying lottery tickets for children, which, depending on where you grew up or maybe the generation you're in, tends to be common in some areas as a gift given to children traditionally, especially around holiday times. And this campaign promotes responsible gambling messaging around that, especially to parents, to educators, and to community members who might be involved with gift giving or are interacting with children day to day.
And you say this began in 2000?
Yeah, the early 2000s. So very, very long time ago
Yeah,
for
that's
me.
yeah. I think that's I don't think I didn't even know that's how long it was going on for. So that's been quite a while, and I think it's really important too because there is so much more talk about gambling nowadays, a lot on sports betting, different parts of it, but really important to also focus on things like this, which is lottery tickets and things like that are probably the older traditional forms of gambling that are still pretty prevalent today, especially with specific customs cultures even where we might think like is this going away or is this no longer a concern? But it is something that we're still paying a lot of attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are here in Wisconsin, which is where I'm currently located in my hometown of Milwaukee, it is a very common thing to still see on Christmas gifts specifically, even New Year's, other holidays, envelopes during Thanksgiving for the cousins or grandkids. It's definitely still present. It's a cultural thing that's been handed down. And I think it's really appropriate that the Gift Responsibly campaign continues and has evolved over a period of several years in order to kind of address the present day form of that.
What do you see as some of the challenges that this campaign attempts to address and help overcome when it comes to the idea of gift giving with lottery tickets? Because I know, like, if I'm working with parents, if I'm working with um, educators, if I'm working just in different populations, the idea of, what's the big deal of giving a kid a lottery ticket? They're not paying for it. So, you know, how are we trying to address some of those challenges and misconceptions around youth gambling in particular that this campaign really aims to address?
That's a great question. I think the thing that we'd like to address the most with parents, especially, is that lottery ticket gifting is not innocuous, even though it may be well intended. Our research shows that the earlier a child is exposed to forms of gambling, the more likely it is that they will have a gambling problem later in life. And we've also learned that a child's first exposure to gambling can be at a pretty young age, between 9 to 11, and is often in the form of a lottery ticket, a scratcher, some other lottery product. And so you have family members, teachers, friends giving what they think is a super innocuous or not harmful gift to children and kind of encouraging them to participate in this form of gambling, essentially, not realizing the long term effects, the dangers, the risks of underage gambling. So this campaign really seeks to highlight that we have research about this. We know that exposing children to lottery products at a young age is not good for them long term. And so this campaign is really directed at parents, at community members, educators, people who have influence on gift giving or cultural norms.
And I think there's a part of it where this, I like it because this gets a way for us to talk about some of those misunderstandings or things that people, because I always, when I, in my role as a counselor, I usually tell people that when it comes to gambling, using substances, or having sex, usually gambling's the first one that people report doing. And when I talk with someone about what's their earliest recollection of gambling, it is often tied to family, where it was something that was done around the holidays, or it was something that was a gift given to them. So some individuals who are seeing me with problems with gambling, their earliest recollections are so grounded in this memory of getting it for a holiday or doing it with a lot of other people. So I think this allows us to have those conversations that are sometimes difficult to have when we're trying to talk to educators, communities, parents about youth gambling, because it's not always seen as the most concerning among issues going out there.
Yeah, I mean, I can give a personal example. When I first helped oversee this campaign and learned more about its goals, I was very shaken because I think my first memory of lottery tickets, Powerball, all of that was going to the gas station and buying my dad, a Powerball for $1 or $2 at a very, very young age. And that was seen as totally normal. We would do pull tabs with our grandma at, the restaurant here in Wisconsin. And I never knew that that was something that raised my risk of problem gambling later in life because it's so kind of culturally ingrained. And I think the most important thing to kind of highlight for parents and teachers is that you're not doing it with ill intent. This is something that you're trying to give to a child to bring happiness, a communal activity, something you can share, something you can do every year, especially around holidays. But it does have harmful effects long term.
And it can seem very, and I like your assuming positive intent that this isn't to cause malicious harm, but a dollar scratch off with a penny does seem sometimes much more affordable for people to buy as a gift who might not be able to spend. It gets them involved. There's a little bit of like excitement with something that doesn't really cost a lot. And to say it doesn't cost them anything. This isn't where they're losing a lot of money on it. But to me, this is sort of like the early slow motion dominoes, where this isn't the one thing that you do this, but it's later on and how this can develop, where then we start to see how it can develop into what it is now. So that's why we want to have those conversations and talks about it. So when you talk about this campaign, who do we look at as like partners in this? Because there's a lot of different like, there's lotteries, there's community partners, which is something that is newer this year. So, who are the people that we're trying to get involved as committing to this campaign?
Well, a few years ago, I would have said primarily lotteries, but as we're learning, community organizations, non-lottery organizations, really do want to participate because this is a very germane and pertinent issue that we're discussing, which is underage gambling as a whole. So when the Gift Responsibly campaign, it used to be called the Holiday Lottery campaign, excuse me. Um, was founded, it was intended to kind of target primarily lotteries, to get them on board as partners, to put out this very specific responsible gifting message, which talks about educating communities about dangers and raising awareness about those risks, but also supporting responsible gambling practices. Um, but now that we've kind of seen this campaign evolve, we've learned that non-lottery organizations also want to talk about the risks of underage youth youth gambling. And they want to talk about statistics. They want to talk about risk. They want to get involved. And not only that, they want a tangible activity to do. So when we talk about the campaign for lotteries, there are individual activities that they complete, such as releasing a press release or putting out 8 or so social media posts raising awareness about underage gambling, we found that these community partners really wanted to engage with that same format. I'll tease it here. The introduction of the Too Young to Bet vertical this year for our Gift Responsibly campaign really aims to target those non-lottery organizations who are community partners this year, who want to have a year-round responsible gambling and underage youth risk-focused message.
I do really like how part of it came from people wanting to get more involved, right? Is that like there were people who, I mean, part of me was as a counselor and a podcast host, like last couple of years, I've been like, well, how do I do this? How do I get involved? Because I want to, so like every year I'd release like an episode of the podcast on gift giving, and what are alternatives besides lottery tickets. So every year I'm trying to think of something like new. What can I do to be a part of it, share that message, and educate at a time like this. So to hear that there was a lot of other organizations wanting to get involved, I think that's a great shift that we see with gambling that we may not have always had over the years compared to like people wanting to get involved in substance use or people wanting to get involved in mental health that it, what a change that is to hear people really advocating for wanting to get more involved with gambling because we didn't always have people standing in line wanting to get more involved. So can you share a little bit more? Like have you seen that or noticed that there's just more people wanting to talk about gambling, help with gambling, or just do something in the areas of gambling that maybe for a while they really didn't get involved in?
Yeah, I will actually, I'll start with the lotteries because I did get a lot of feedback on this. I get tons of emails every year during the Gift Responsibly season, and we try to accommodate all those requests, items in the toolkit, things like that. But one that I kept getting was requests from European lotteries specifically, who said this lottery message is just this gift giving lottery message is maybe not culturally applicable to our audience. We don't give lottery tickets as a gift in this country. That's a very strange thing. And therefore, it wasn't very easy for them to use our toolkit and our messaging because the audience, it didn't resonate with the audience necessarily. So we were getting a lot of requests from lotteries specifically to make it more culturally responsive and culturally flexible. On top of that, we were getting community organizations who were saying, I don't want to be an afterthought. I don't want to be an organization's bullet point at the bottom of this page. I want to be a commensurate partner to the lotteries. The lottery levels are doing these intense activities, and here we are kind of a little bit beneath that, maybe not doing as much, but they're equally as passionate and they want to do the same activities. So we're able to, this year specifically, but also in recent years, broaden those activities, make it more applicable to individual organizations. For example, one change that we made this year, the lottery levels, like I mentioned earlier, put out a press release as part of their campaign activities, announcing their commitment to the campaign and what they plan to do for the season. We also heard that some community organizations never put out press releases. They're too small, or they don't have a communications department, or they've never written a press release before, and trying to make that campaign activity work for them. So this year, they have the chance to take that press release content and put it in a newsletter or on their website as editorial content instead to make it easier for them to participate.
Yeah, that's amazing. It just also too is that you're letting people know that their voice does matter. That when they share feedback and they let you know that that is what can help make some of these changes and really expand the campaign, which is including, you already kind of gave a little bit of a sneak peek into it, which is the recent addition of the Too Young to Bet campaign as well. So I think that's a perfect time to talk about this newest addition to the campaign.
Yes, I'm so excited about Too Young to Bet, not only because I helped create most of the graphics and messaging, but also because this is something that we have been asked for several years in a row. This kind of year-round messaging that isn't necessarily targeted to holidays, but discusses youth gambling as a whole, as opposed to just lottery products. So, for example, there are some states in the United States that don't have lottery products legal in their state, And therefore, even the Gift Responsibly campaign message for them is not necessarily as applicable as it could be. So the Too Young to Bet campaign was introduced this year to expand specifically community organizations' participation in the campaign, discussing types of gambling that might be present in their community, that children might be witnessing or participating in, and educating parents on those risks in addition to the risks of lottery tickets and underage lottery play. I think some folks have asked, does this kind of replace the campaign, the Gift Responsibly campaign? It absolutely does not. It's an option within the campaign for folks who don't want to talk only about lottery products. It just might not be applicable to your organization. But the good thing is you can talk about lottery products in that Too Young to Bet vertical because it is something that children may encounter or that parents are worried about. And that messaging is important during the holidays and potentially year round. So this toolkit includes new logos, new graphic suites, new messaging, sample social media posts that we've written. And it's the first time that we've kind of explicitly broadened the Gift Responsibly campaign to discuss other types of gambling that children might see. So for example, one of our social media posts that we've written as a sample copy is discussing like things that children might be doing that seem innocuous, but can be considered underage gambling. And that's kind of similar to what we spoke about earlier with parents unknowingly gifting lottery products. There's similar things like letting kids press the spin button on your phone or using them to place sports bets or choosing a parlay for you. Those are similar forms of engagement that parents might not realize is a risk factor.
Yeah, I think of like the what used to be the some of the old days of a kid sitting in a bar with their parent, as I would hear a lot in the alcohol and substance use world, was they were there. Doesn't mean, but in gambling, there was so many ways in which sometimes kids do get involved or are part of it that we don't really think of as they're gambling, but they are exposed to gambling or they're doing something that's a part of it, even though it might not be the money that they spend or it might not be that they would lose, but like you're still having them engaging, exposed to this at a young age, and with not just the lottery, but you mentioned before pull tabs in Wisconsin. I mean, that's still a really big thing where kid might be ripping it, and they how they get excited over it or the reaction that they're having. So that the the Too Young to Bet campaign does educate us and open our minds to seeing more of how kids do get exposed to gambling, not just by one form, but by just almost any form now. It can happen.
Yeah, and I think it also, to build off of that point, it also these are activities that parents don't consider gambling, may or may not consider gambling. But we've seen research that indicates that children are particularly vulnerable to the association of entertainment and gambling, which is something that we hear about a lot these days, which is where do we draw the line between watching a game and gambling on the game, and can you watch a game without participating in gambling? And I think we're worried about this next generation of children who are growing up and they see that association as the same thing. If we're watching a game, then dad's gambling. And so this kind of campaign is encouraging parents to say, make that separation. This is an activity for adults and it is never appropriate for children.
Yeah, there's when I go to sometimes I've been to a Brewer game and we got the famous sausage races, right? So they do the run in the seventh inning, I think sixth inning. And I remember there are times where I sometimes see like a dad might give like $1 to each of their kid. And then each kid gets to pick which sausage they think is going to win. And then, you know, dad pays for it. And then the kids maybe win like $5. So I think this is where like the concept of gambling gets denied or the harm gets minimized because it's $4. It's not their money. What's the harm? But to me, I look further down at, what happens when that money's not involved. And then now I think where we look at that line of entertainment and how someone now we fast forward to today with like sports betting, and there's a concern people can't watch a game unless they are betting on it, when before it was focusing on the game. But that can really happen at a young age where you introduce, money to something, and that can be a really, really tough relationship to untangle, especially with a young mind and someone who's now also young. We're talking about their brains aren't developed. They're also more at risk taking, which is normal. I just want to make it very clear that's normal. That's how the brain's developed and working right now. But these are all the reasons why we really talk about why gambling at a young age is a concern and a risk, even though we see a lot of the things happen later on, is that it starts early. That's why I kind of call it some slow motion dominoes, because we don't see how fast it is until it's really starting to come, falling pretty hard on somebody. So I really like the Too Young to Bet campaign. I think is going to really open up a lot of doors to have more discussions around youth gambling and betting that we didn't always have year round. Because also one thing that I wanted to mention was I see this happen. I saw um, scratch offs at weddings as a wedding favor, right? So it's not just the holidays where this happens. It's a good time to talk about it, but these are things that do happen all the time.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to well-intentioned entertainment, letting kids participate in a what seems to be a harmless activity that truly isn't. And I think what I really love about the Too Young to Bet campaign is that it doesn't focus on the negatives and you're a horrible parent, you're a horrible relative, you should not do this. It's a positive campaign. It says your kids are great. They have a bright future. They might be 6 years old, trying on mom's shoes in the closet, and maybe one day they'll be a lawyer and they'll be wearing those heels into court. But right now, why would we risk that future? It might seem harmless, but why would you risk it? And kind of having these messages based around how they have bright futures, they have a great path ahead of them. We shouldn't risk what's coming for them down the line, even when it may seem harmless or innocuous to do something like a pull tab with them now. I also think it's kind of akin to what we've learned about alcohol introduction in families and how alcohol is kind of viewed in the house. I know that there's a lot of folks here in Wisconsin, as an example, who think the earlier the better to teach, responsible drinking and things like that. But it's kind of similar in that it's unpredictable sometimes in families.
Can you talk about some of the specifics on, because you were a part of designing the messaging and stuff, and I really like to hear that you called it like positive, because I'm a big person on stigmatizing language. I'm a big person even on images that we choose. Like sometimes we've got a picture of someone looking like they're in the worst state of their life, and like to me, I'm like, is that motivating? Is that what when people see that, is that they call a number because they see someone in really bad. I'm always trying to think of like from someone with lived experience or who we're trying to reach, how do we capture the right messaging and the right audience, especially wanting to have the right message, but also wanting to have all of that combined to where someone doesn't walk away feeling ashamed. They're not feeling like I'm a terrible person or I'm a terrible parent, or because to me, I think that's not going to help people to connect to it and to take that step. I want someone to feel safe. I want someone to feel that there's something positive with this. So I would love to hear from you on how that messaging, because I saw it all when you presented on it before, and when I looked at the toolkit where um, the intention that was put behind each of those messages and even the pictures and stuff into that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can say that even before Too Young to Bet was introduced, the Gift Responsibly campaign has always emphasized that one of our guidelines for participation is not having the use of stigmatizing language or imagery or things like that. We don't want to demean people. We don't want to frighten people. We don't want to make people feel ashamed. Broadly, outside of even the public health sphere, for marketers and communicators, we've learned that shame-based motivation is not very reliable. It might get some people in the moment, but long term, it's not effective. So when we were looking at Too Young to Bet, we really wanted to find, like you said, something positive, something motivating, that makes people kind of relax a little bit and be open to educating themselves and learning a little bit more. Shame is not the right thing to introduce there, but also the imagery of depression or people at the, on a step with holding their head in their hands. That's also not motivating. It might make people feel seen sometimes, but it doesn't necessarily motivate you to do something every time. With the Too Young to Bet toolkit, we wanted to feature imagery of children because we are talking about children. It makes sense to show children. And that's been something that has not been part of the campaign before. We previously in guidelines, we've restricted the use of child imagery or teen imagery. But this year, to talk about kids, we're going to show kids. And the more and more we kind of went through our image options, I think we like the element of humor. We like the element of a bright kind of positive pastel palette for a lot of these, where it reminds you that these are kids at the end of the day. It's adorable to see a little girl try on her mom's suit coat, or it's really funny to see a kid grab his dad's camera and try to take pictures. We all know kids like that who they get into their parents' clothes and they just look so cute. And you can think about them being a doctor in 20 years or something like that. But it hits home that these are children and that there is an absolute line between a children and an adult who can legally gamble. And where it might have been hazy or uncertain before, this campaign is cementing that that line exists. If they're too young to really get into med school, they're too young to bet. If they're too young to fit into an adult heel, they're too young to bet. And they do have that bright future ahead of them, which is why we wanted to emphasize that kind of brighter pastel colors as well. They have this future. It is bright, it's shiny, it's well lit, it's ahead of them, and they're confident. A lot of the images that we use in this toolkit are kids with their arms crossed or like on their hips, holding whatever instrument they're using in their career. And that's really to sell home that that is ahead of them potentially. And when we blur that line between child and adult, we put that at risk.
Yeah, I really love to hear that. And not knowing that, just by talking to you now of what went into that. Because I love the fact of trying to send an important message, let people know that this is something that is to be taken serious. One, we can address serious issues with humor, but also that we are not trying to shame anyone into it. I think we're doing better. I look at it from the side of, treatment provider, and I still sometimes see the images of call this number for help, or you have a problem with this and the picture looks does not seem motivating. Just to me, I struggle sometimes that we haven't fully just shifted away from all that. But yours is an example of like how you can do all this in the right way. You can have a serious message, one that's important. You can have humor with it as well. You can use certain images, but also sending an overall message that this is something positive, encouraging to reach out to versus someone being ashamed, which is going to drive them further away from it.
Yeah. And I think also a really important thing we wanted to emphasize about shame here is that no parent wants to be told that they're not doing a good job with their kids. That's a really touchy subject. And I think that that's why it's so hard to communicate with parents, teachers, family members, because no one wants to be told that they're putting their child at risk. Then that brings up feelings of guilt, of shame, of anger, possibly. With the TM Tibet campaign, it's so important to keep that imagery positive while still delivering that serious note. That kind of positive and humorous opening is how we kind of prime people to be ready for that more serious message. So if you see kind of the graphics, it starts really positive. You've got positive text, maybe a little bit of a joke here. And then at the bottom, we cement that line that gambling is not for kids. and that they're not able to participate in things like lottery, roulette, other games. And that you're able to control that. That's a lot of what the copy kind of for these sample social media posts emphasizes is that this is an easy shift to make in your mind to say, okay, this is just not for kids. It doesn't change a lot of what most Americans, I would say, would do day to day. They're a little bit more conscious about gift giving, and that's the ultimate goal.
And I realize, and when you look at the toolkit, which the toolkits are always amazing because you make it really hard for people not to have all the resources they need. So it's not like having to come up with all these things on there. Like there's so many different things in it. If anyone's looked at it in the past, if they already did sign up this year for it, if they haven't yet, like I think they will be really taken back at how much you give. And then I see it too. You know, in prior years, I've seen it in people's emails at the bottom. There'd be an image of it. I've seen it on, social media. I've seen the images. Like it's not like anyone's really reinventing the wheel. They might add their company logo or there might be a slight thing, but you really remove so many barriers to when someone commits to this, there's not a heavy lift. It doesn't mean there isn't any lift, but it's not as heavy as having to like recreate, come up with this all on their own. But with these toolkits, which, continue to come out, they're an incredible resource for people to really be able to say, yeah, we can do this and not have to worry about having to take on too much. And I was wondering, is that part of the intent is to try and give people as much resources as possible that this isn't another thing that's added on to what we all have, which is a pretty crowded plate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most common questions I get from new lotteries or new organizations that are looking to participate is, wow, those levels look really intense. I have to post 8 social media posts in November and December. That's crazy. But what they don't realize until they get into the toolkit is that we've made it so easy that I think actually in both toolkits this year, it's a bit of an achievement. There's at least 10 to 12 sample social media posts in each toolkit, so if you are at one of those top lottery levels, you don't even need to create your own social media posts if you don't want to. You can use all of these that we've created for you and still hit that campaign activity minimum. But we have gotten feedback from organizations that it's hard to assemble those facts and statistics. It's hard to put together social media copy if you don't necessarily have a social media manager on staff or someone who can put together a press release or things like that. So we try to make it as plug and play as possible. And I think one of the achievements this year is assembling an updated youth gambling fact sheet, which we've been getting requests for years saying, a lot of the data that we've been using is just not accurate anymore. Where's the data on sports betting? Where's the data from Africa or Asia? Where's the data from Canada? Let's learn a little bit more about what we can put into our social media posts so it's more applicable to our community. And that's something I emphasized a lot in the webinar that I did, which is that only you know your audience and what's best for your audience. So some people might look at the toolkit and say, these are great. I'm going to use them exactly as they are. It'll be great. But there are some organizations that want a specific call to action. They might have a local helpline or local resources. They want to connect this overall message to their community. So they might change those graphics or they might add a link in the social copy or things like that. And that's something we highly encourage because it benefits the people in your communities to have that tailor-made message.
Yeah, I think it's also great because of the addition of the community partners that there's going to be sometimes like treatment programs may not have um a a social media person. They may not have like a big marketer. Like this might be staff who's also doing these other things to run some of these campaigns. So I really like the fact that you do make it easier for people who don't have all the resources that maybe other organizations do have. So I want to speak for someone like myself that this really helps to be able to get involved when we don't think it's too much, that I can't handle it. This is pretty manageable. Saying I think it was the all the toolkit I think really helps people to know, like when you have community organizations or a treatment program, they might not have a social media person. They might not even have a real big marketing department. This could be the same person that's a counselor, like that's doing all this. So I think while other places may have a vast amount of resources, the fact that as we expand these campaigns and as we introduce the Too Young to Bet and we want other people more involved and they want to get involved, you're doing a really good job of like just lowering any barriers or obstacles. Like I said, you make it almost really hard for someone to not be able to join.
But I think that's kind of the inherent goal a little bit, especially now that we have Too Young to Bet as a campaign option. I think there was definitely an argument to be made in the past that, oh, this isn't applicable for me or my community. Maybe I won't participate, or I'll sign up, but maybe I won't do all of the activities. It's just maybe they weren't applicable. In my mind, between Gift Responsibly and the Too Young to Bet campaign, that is the entire whole of people. One of the two or both applies to everyone because as we keep repeating, a responsible gambling message is always applicable to your community. Whether the legal age for gambling is 21 or 18 or somewhere in there, responsible gambling is always an applicable message, especially when we look at other forms of gambling and especially when we're looking at youth. So it's kind of hard to say, well, I don't want to participate in that. That's not for me because as you mentioned, we have all of these resources that are available, and I'm always available for questions. I've already met with several organizations this year who had questions about implementation or file types or things like that. And then they're better able to participate. And I think the goal is to have that go year round, especially this year. We see the Gift Responsibly campaign kind of peter out at the natural end of gift giving, which for some is Christmas and then maybe a little
Yeah.
bit during New Year's. Or if you're Jewish like me, it's Hanukkah, which I think is a little early this year. But after that, when do we talk about gift responsibly? We don't. We wait an entire year to talk about it again. But this is a really great way for, I think, especially lotteries to transition from not just gift giving lottery based messaging, but a responsible gambling message year round, that they can go from gift giving during the holidays to this toolkit that they can stagger out content year round if they'd like to. And I've already heard from some lotteries in particular who have said, we want to make this a dedicated part of our communications year round. We want to publish one of these posts once a month. And I think the Too Young to Bet specifically has, I think, at least 12 sample posts. So you could, in theory, queue one of these every month and have that message kind of reinforced monthly.
Yeah. Amazing. Like I said, you're just finding more and more ways for people to have a hard time saying no or can't do it, which is a lot of lift on your end and everything that your team. So definitely want to give recognition for that. So one more question before we get to like a final takeaway is how do you look at measuring the effectiveness of a campaign? So I know it's always year after, different year. Now we got a new part of it coming out, but how do we reflect back and think about like how is this like effective or did we do what we set out to do by all this? We're doing a podcast here, so, am I going to look at, trying to get a certain amount of viewers to pay attention to this one or downloads? But like, how do we look at a campaign such as this and knowing that it also is potentially expanding to a year-round thing, right? Like the goal would be this doesn't have an end, this is ongoing. But how do you look at the idea of like the effectiveness of something like this?
Yeah, I think the first metric that I look at, there's several, but from NCPG's perspective, we look at the total campaign participants, and that number has just been going up every year. I think in 2023, it was 160 total participants, 175 last year, I think, for total participants. And this year, because I think we've expanded those community partner organization options, we're already at over 180, and we're only 2 weeks from the registration deadline to be included in the press release. So we're already seeing a great increase in participation year over year. Another thing that we kind of look at is one of the campaign activities is a post-campaign survey where we ask every individual organization that participated, tell us what you did. Did you do all of the activities? Was it difficult for some reason? Was there an activity you just couldn't get done this year? And we ask them to estimate their total number of impressions for social media campaigns specifically. And I think I mentioned this in the webinar. You see a great disparity between larger organizations that have an ad budget and maybe smaller organizations that are doing only organic posting. So there's no perfect number. It's about what's applicable to your audience. And if you're seeing year to year changes, are you getting more interest when you post? Are your posts being picked up by the algorithm and shared by other people? Are your individual KPIs being satisfied? But I think the one that I enjoy the most as the person who kind of oversees the participation is the addition of new lotteries and new organizations from all around the world. Um, I'm really heartened to know that the Ukraine lottery has participated again this year, and they reached out to say that they were really grateful that we provided a translation option for the toolkit this year. So they're able to translate our materials without necessarily needing to redo the whole graphic suite. It's stuff like that that really warms my heart as people learn more about the campaign and say, I'd like to do that too. We're really appreciative of our folks who have been doing it 7 years in a row. We love them, but I think it's really great to see that this campaign picks up new people every year, and maybe organizations that wouldn't necessarily have a connection to gambling or to public health, but still feel that it's an applicable message for their communities.
That's great. I think, and it's always important to know that it's beyond just the posts and the release, that it's what does this help us to do? And you gave a lot of great examples for how to look at that individually as someone who might decide to do it, or as a collective, even for you in the organization, like what you look for. So, all right. So final takeaways or anything you want audience members to know is here's your time to shine.
Thank you. I will say that the deadline to register for the Gift Responsibly / Too Young to Bet campaign this year and still be included in the press release is November 26th. So if you're thinking about registering, you have about 2 weeks until we hit that deadline. Another thing I think to end on a takeaway for me is something I've been talking about over and over again this year is audience segmentation. We get questioned a lot. Which toolkit should I use? Which graphics should I use? What do I do? And you know that answer better than anyone else for your organization, for your audience. So I encourage folks to think about audience segmentation and what is most meaningful and valuable for their audiences. Does it mean using the Too Young to Bet toolkit? Does it mean using the Gift Responsibly toolkit? Is there a blend of both that you think might be better? And especially thinking about the social media channels where you're reaching your audience. Those audiences are really different on different channels. So when you have time, or if you have time this year, to be a little bit more strategic and think what message would work better on Instagram versus Facebook or our newsletter, there's a lot of flexibility in the campaign this year to really target those audiences.
It's amazing. I really am thankful that you joined this to talk about it and share. This is not a usual podcast episode, and guest. All the work that you've done with it is incredible, and you had such a big part of it in the work that you did, and everyone else that was involved. So, and we're gonna have links where people can find it and get involved. And by there, I know they can also reach out if they have any more questions. But I do want to thank you again, Julia, for joining, because this is amazing. A lot of work, a lot going on with gambling, and a lot more to talk about. And timing right now is going to be right in the mix of gift giving, but in general, we want this to be an ongoing conversation. So thanks for being such a big part of sharing that message.
Thank you. And thank you so much for featuring the Gift Responsibly campaign this year. It means a lot.